YouTube, what's good? Senju, back at it again with another video. Now, today we are going over TICO talks. I am fully aware of the patch notes that went live yesterday for the update that happened earlier today because of the server consolidation as well as update 1.15.2. However, it was mainly just a small update, so I didn't feel as though it was necessary to go over those changes because they weren't really major changes. They were just, the maintenance update as well as the field boss buff for the foreseeable future until March 6th. However, today, some major news dropped, and we finally have confirmation that Throne and Liberty actually wants to put up a fight in the MMO scene and stay pretty much at the top of the leaderboards for the foreseeable future, because there really is no other MMO that is quite competing with Throne and Liberty, because most of them are outdated and they've been out for so long that people are just ready to move on to newer titles. Therefore, imagine my surprise when Throne and Liberty first released, and it seems like they were just going downhill from the start, even with the immense changes they were making. However, with TICO talks from today, we now know a lot of the expected changes that are coming were the changes that we have been asking for a very long time. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. First off, we're going to talk about the boss changes. Yes, we are getting new portals for the field bosses, and keep in mind, all of these changes are going to carry over to the ARC bosses. And as I describe these to you, I just need you to understand, these are changes that I personally had been talking about since we really got into the meat and potatoes of what the problems were with field bosses and ARC bosses. And it's nice to know that a lot of the changes that I personally suggested immediately went through. So with the very first change, we have the new portals for the field bosses, which again are carrying over to the ARC bosses, and these are going to be the peace portals, the faction portals, and the guild portals. So now when you go up to the field bosses or the ARC bosses, you're going to see 3 portals, and each one is going to have its own instance with its own functionality. Now for the peace portal, you're going to have instanced PvE fights, which are also going to have all of the preformed parties stay connected, meaning that once you go in through the peace portal specifically for any ARC boss or field boss, once this update goes live, if you go in as a preformed party, whether it be 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 6 people, you're going to stay as a party, which means that you no longer have to go into the same portal to make sure that you guys are also going to be in the same instance. So as long as you enter into the peace portal, you're always going to be preformed, partied in the same instance, which is huge. And it also makes it very easy and accessible for a lot of people that are trying to get gear, because you don't have to go through the faction portal, you don't have to go through the guild portal. For the faction portal, this is going to be a copy and paste of the peace portal, except it's going to be PvEVP. So this is what we currently have as our faction v faction, where it's mainly just the PvP, or what they currently call war. Except now it's going to be instanced and separated from the peace portal, so when you go to a field boss, you have options. You don't have to just deal with faction, you can do whatever you feel like. However, I highly anticipate that peace and guild are going to be the main 2. I highly doubt that the faction portals are going to be used as much, because people with the current system, they don't really mess around with PvP bosses too much because they don't like having their gear chances messed with. So I completely understand if guilds and peace portals are going to be the top 2. Now, the interesting one, which funny enough is the one that I'm most excited about, is the guild portal. See, the guild portal is going to be a 1v1 guild battle on the field or ARC boss. However, instead of having that insane player count which bogged down your PC and made it unplayable, they've decided to actually limit it to 36 to 48 players. It's a genius move, because it really will be a balanced fight. You have to have the bare minimum of 36 players to even get into the guild portal, meaning that if you're not going into the guild portal with 36 players, then you're going to have to either choose the peace or the faction portal. So the guilds that do fight are no longer going to be able to sit there and cheese the entire guild fight by having their alliances roll up or having their buddies roll up and kill them off and yada yada yada. It is a 1v1 instance fight. Well, not instance, it's a 1v1 open world fight, but you have to have the bare minimum of 36 to 48 players to even get into the guild fight, which makes it incredibly balanced across the board. And all of these changes also carry over to the arc bosses, as stated before, which overall, the new changes for the field bosses and the arc bosses are just a complete W. Now, if we go into the content changes, this is where I was actually very surprised. See, what they've done is they consolidated the Abyss and Dimension tokens into Tier 1 and Tier 2 tokens, meaning that all the tokens that are currently corresponding for Tier 1 gear will be known as Tier 1 tokens, and they will get a more specific name down the line. But this means that whatever you do that contributes to Tier 1 content after Talandre goes live will only be used with Tier 1 tokens. So you can do all the content in the game without having to have specific tokens for per se specific activities, meaning if you want to go do open world dungeons, if you want to go back into co-op dungeons, you only need Tier 1 tokens for those Tier 1 corresponding activities. That is the exact same thing that will be happening for Tier 2. And the best part about it is that when this update goes live on March 6th, you don't need to sit there and hurry up and try to get out the gate and farm all of these activities to burn through and get new tokens. Any existing tokens that you have are just going to consolidate over to the corresponding tier, which for everybody globally will be T1. For everybody who are playing on the servers with this content already, they're basically just going to have everything consolidated to its respective inventories. But this is huge, honestly, because this is going to make grinding so much easier. Everything is going to be consolidated across the board, so no matter what you do, if it grants you tokens, you're going to get Tier 1 or Tier 2 tokens corresponding to the activities or the tier of the activities that you are doing, which just, it improves playability, it improves the quality of life, and it makes it a lot easier to go through and just play what you want to play. Now, in addition to all those content changes, something that we really need to speak about, which is both a buff and a nerf, is the weekly mission quality of life changes. See, weekly missions, or the weekly milestones in their current iteration, are absolute dog water. Because in most cases, most of the rewards that you're going to get are just not usable once you get towards the quote-unquote level cap or the gear score cap. And on top of that, only a couple of rewards were getting used anyway. Most people were just spinning the jewelry rewards until they got the Band of Universal Power, and then they would flip it for Lucent or try to recycle it for other items. Or you would get people who would literally use it only for runes because they refused to do the tier-based dungeons to get the runes, which I completely understand. So what they've done is they've actually overhauled the entire system. Now, in addition to all of the other content that can give you Tier 1 and Tier 2 tokens, you can complete the weekly missions and get Tier 1 and Tier 2 tokens specifically from weekly missions and their milestones. However, the system will now have over 15 different missions across all aspects of the game that will give you between 40 and 60 points per completion, in addition to the basic rewards for completing just those weekly missions. The points will also go towards your weekly mission points, which are now your weekly milestone points. And as you complete more missions, you'll gain higher points, and then you can collect the weekly mission rewards per tier. So from what I've seen, they jump about 50 points per tier. And as you complete these weekly missions, you're not only going to get the weekly mission rewards from each mission that you complete, but the points that you receive from completing those missions and claiming the rewards will count towards your weekly tier milestone over the course of that week. And it essentially moves in the same function as our battle pass. As you get more points, you unlock a new tier, you collect the rewards. The nerf that I'm speaking of is that you can't choose what you're going to get. From what I've seen, they are already predetermined rewards, and it looks like they're going to be important rewards because most of them were trade unlock stones, which are very hard to get, as you already know. So it's very nice to know that this is just going to be overhauled and made more new player friendly, but also just made easier overall to just get through and get done. Because it made zero sense to just do all of the milestones only to receive 3 rewards and then you only got 1. Whereas now it's kind of like a weekly battle pass that you get to burn through, and you just continuously get more loot on top of more loot. Overall, absolute W changes so far. However, the biggest change so far, outside of the combat changes, which we will get into in a second, is the gear synchronization. Holy moly. The biggest issue that this game has had so far is its gear progression and its linear gear progression, because it was not linear by any means. It was always vertical. However, with gear synchronization, listen to this. Once you have fully leveled a piece of gear to max level, you can purchase additional slots to place external gear into, which will automatically sync non-leveled gear to the gear level that is being used as the anchor. So for further explanation on what exactly is going to happen, let's say you have a piece of tier 2 gear maxed out at level 12. As he said, specifically, what will happen is you can place this gear as the anchor into your synchronization slot. Let's say you have 3 more helmets, right, from 3 different sets that you want to test for your character, but you don't have the materials to level them. You can place all of these helmets into that slot with that anchor, and they will all be leveled up to the level of your anchor, meaning all 3 of those helmets will now be level 12, as long as they are tier 2 helmets. The best part about this is that if you're like me and you know you're going to have a main set that you're going to use, but you also are going to swap off to maybe 2 or 3 different sets for testing or just playing different playstyles in general, this also carries over to weapons, by the way, you can have all of your sets pre-leveled, and all you need to do is get the traits, which, funny enough, are not as difficult to get as they used to be because of how readily available a lot of the traits are. So in terms of the progression, this is a night and day change, because it not only attributes to build diversity, it attributes to linear progression, and it's also going to reduce a lot of the prices in the auction house, because people are going to be able to just use whatever they want through the synchronization system and have up to 4 sets available to use. Now, let's talk about the gear progression before we get into the combat changes, because I really want to go over the combat changes, but the gear progression, holy moly. Basically, what they are stating is that once tier 2 launches with TheRealSenj on March 6, you'll be able to do your adventure codex, as well as any activity in tier 2. And instead of having to jump from tier 1 purple to tier 2 purple, which was going to be a nightmare, and an extreme vertical jump in power, you can now jump from tier 1 purple to tier 2 blue gear and use that as a stopgap to get to tier 2 purple. So now it's going to be a lot easier to bridge that gap, especially for newer players, but also for returning players. And in general, this should be the blueprint moving forward for Throne and Liberty, because as long as they are going to keep this ridiculous cycle of releasing new tiers of gear when big expansions drop, you have to have a bridge to get people from that lower tier to the newer tier. So I would implore that this stays, because this is just a genius move. Not only are you going to be able to have a easier time to get to that purple gear, but for the people whose RNG just isn't looking out for them, the blue gear is always going to be there for them to be able to use, which puts them at that threshold right below pinnacle content, which is very good. The best part about this is that with the gear synchronization, you can still bring up all of your purples. So if you happen to get 1 purple at tier 12 or at tier 2 to plus 12, then once you start using your blues to get that new purple gear, you can slowly start putting those into the synchronization window to even further the ease of use and quality of life of your gear progression, making it more linear and thus reducing the issues that we are having with the auction house at the moment. Now, all that being said, none of that compares to the combat changes that are coming in with TheRealSenj on March 6th. So let's briefly speak about the combat changes. So on screen, you can see the combat changes clear as day. They just listed them out. I didn't even want to go ahead and just take them little by little and break them down. I just think we just need to read over them and go over them as we read over them so you guys understand how important these changes are. For the first one, we have player movement speed will no longer be automatically reduced in combat. This is one of those cases where you broke something or you tried to fix something that didn't need to be fixed in the first place. Player movement speed no longer being automatically reduced in combat is the biggest change for the combat outside of targeting. Because this means that if you're using bows, if you're using great swords, if you're using daggers, you're no longer just going to be automatically slowed and made easier to target. If you're supposed to be on a high mobility class, if you're supposed to be high mobility at range, if you're using mobility skills in general, and then you immediately want to go into a combat ability, you're no longer going to be slowed just from, you're no longer going to be punished for getting into combat. That's what this really means. And that is huge for melee classes specifically, especially if you're dagger based, greatsword based, or spear based, because it's just going to make it a lot easier for you to be able to move around, target people, and use your abilities. However, the bigger change for all melee users is the base melee attack ranges. Gaming in general consistently gets this wrong when it comes to melee weapons or melee users. For some reason, they make the range around 4 to 5 meters when it should be 6 to 8 meters, because that 4 to 5 meter range is too close. Most players can back out of that and backpedal immediately to get out of range, and it makes melee unplayable. And that, in addition to the targeting issues, in addition to the reduced in combat issues that we were having prior to these combat changes, made melee nearly unplayable. That's why you really only saw people using great swords and spears and daggers, because those were the readily available classes that could make use of stealth and one-shot mechanics, where they didn't have to deal with prolonged fights. Because melee users dealing with prolonged fights in this game was a nightmare. You almost always lost. But these two changes are going to make it a lot easier to just get rid of those people that you're trying to get rid of. Now, in addition to that, several skills have been updated for improved fluidity, such as Precision Dash and Frost Smokescreen, which I'm sure we'll get more details on when the patch notes drop for Talandre. But the big change is tab targeting has been improved to better consider camera direction. Boy, oh boy, is this a huge one, because tab targeting historically within this title has been absolute septic tank juice. I don't know what went wrong, but there's so many settings and so many checks that the tab targeting system has to go through that when you actually try to target somebody, it's going to target the guy next to you, the guy out in Narnia, the medic next door. Like, it targets everything but the person that you're trying to target 2 feet in front of you. So knowing that this is now going to consider the camera direction instead of the main settings, it tells me that in the system, the script or the code that they wrote for the targeting system was to prioritize your settings over the actual angle or the target that you were pointing the camera at, which that is just a fundamental flaw. So it's nice to know that this has been upped in priority so that you will less likely run into those issues where you target somebody in front of you and it hits the guy behind you to the left pulling a ticket at the subway line. So in addition to that, click targeting has also been further refined for accuracy and precision, and they're also bringing a new setting that will allow players to ignore friendly targets when clicking. Huge W, especially for anyone that is not playing support. For anyone that is not playing support, this is everything that they needed, because the main issue with that is that you could target somebody and it'll hit a friendly. You could target somebody, it'll hit the guy behind you getting Subway cookies. You target somebody, it'll hit the sheep way over there behind the gate. Like, these are things that you cannot have happening in a mainly melee based title, especially when you have people moving around at Mach speed, going in and out of stealth, plenty of players on the screen bogging down your frame rate, making it harder to target in general. You have to have as accurate of a targeting system as possible, and it's nice that they're reining in on this and making it more refined. Now, in addition to that, camera inertia has been reduced, which is huge just for mobility issues. Maximum zoom has been increased by 33%, also very good. However, not launching in March but launching in April is going to be improved target visualization, target of target display, and monster type indicators on nameplates, something that I'm personally excited about, because this is going to help for knowing which kind of monsters you're going to run into, if they're elites, if they're bosses, if they're just regular ads, or just based knowledge to let you know what kind of enemies you're coming in contact with, so you know what's going to be weak to certain elements or certain kinds of weaponry or certain kinds of abilities. So overall, from top to bottom, between the portal changes, between the ARCHBOSS changes, the content changes, the gear synchronization changes, the combat changes, Talandre is looking to be the make it or break it patch for Throne and Liberty, and it looks like they're gonna make it. honestly, because all of these changes, in addition to all of the new content and bringing us fully up to speed with Korea, in addition to the new solo dungeons, which are completely brand new to both versions of the game, everything's caught up. Everybody's going to be on the same playing field. It's going to be a lot easier to get leveled. It's going to be very hard to sit there and not compete with the top end. That's all we ask for. And it's going to be a lot easier to just play the game in general due to the combat changes. Listen, I got nothing to complain about. At the end of the day, I'll see you guys into laundry. I'll catch you guys for the next one. Take it easy.